I bought a new house in the small town of Winthrop. The house was cheap, but the most important part was that I needed to get away from the city. A few months ago, I had a run-in with a stalker. While I had managed to get him arrested, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes just constantly watching me. I felt like there were eyes everywhere, at home and on the street. So I decided to move out into the country to somewhere with fewer people, just for peace of mind. The house itself was big and somewhat old, but otherwise very welcoming. The agent who introduced me to the house had been required to mention that a serial killer had lived here in the past, which was why the house was so cheap. However, he, and later, my next-door neighbor Sarah, both told me to pay the thought no mind. For other owners had lived in the house since then, and all of them were very happy with it. I loved the house. Its interior furnishings were beautiful and very comfortable. The people of Winthrop were friendly, often bringing over freshly baked pastries or inviting me over for dinner. Get-togethers, they said, were the key to making sure everyone who lived in Winthrop loved it there. Yet after a week, I stopped loving it. The feeling of someone watching returned, worse than before. I tried to ignore it, but soon I started losing sleep. Giant bags grew under my eyes, and I began yawning almost as much as I breathed. Sarah was kind enough to let me stay in her house for a few nights. It was during this time that I heard the legend of Forrest Carter, the serial killer who had lived in my house. While no one knows his exact kill count, Carter, also known as the Winthrop Peacock, was a man with an extremely severe case of narcissism. Legends say that he couldn't fall asleep if he didn't feel like he was being watched. He was finally arrested for putting up a scarecrow to watch him during the night. Only it wasn't a scarecrow. Carter had murdered a 17-year-old girl just so her corpse could stare at him. The story gave me shivers, and after I went home, I felt like there were hundreds of pairs of eyes just watching me no matter how I turned. Today, however, was the first day that I acted out. I was cooking breakfast when I felt the eyes. Instinctively, out of fear, I threw my kitchen knife, which lodged itself into the wall. As I pulled it out, I found myself staring at a pair of eyes, pickling in formaldehyde. I've been watching the police peel away the drywall of my house for hours now. So far, they've found 142 pairs of eyes in little glass jars. The scariest thing is, everyone was staring at me. Cradling my 4-year-old daughter in my arms, all I could do was listen as the screaming outside the house got louder and louder, interspersed with sounds of violence and horrible wet thuds and the unmistakable echo of muscle and sinew resisting the force that was slowly tearing them apart. It started just 3 days ago. Something happened out there in the world, and before we even get news of what's going on, seemingly half of the world is gone. They poured forth across the world. From wherever it was that it started, I hear banging on the door downstairs and the screams of people being slaughtered, unable to mount a proper resistance against such a force. It doesn't take long before the pounding gives way to splintering and the sound of shattering wood. They're in the house. No more than a moment or two passes before the door to the bedroom starts shuddering. The things I piled against it are holding, for now, but I know, realistically, that they're going to manage to come through. I keep rocking my little girl, humming a lullaby in her ear to calm her as she cries. The pounding grows in force and volume, and the frame starts to crack. I put my little girl on my lap, her back to my chest, and I stroke her head with both hands, from the top of her scalp, down across her ears, just as I've done ever since she was a baby, just the way she loves it. The effect is instantaneous. Her desperate crying calms to a series of sobs and hiccups, her small body shuddering against mine in fear. I keep humming to her, soothing her hair, acting for all the world as if nothing is out of place, not a single thing amiss. Agonizingly slowly, in a reverse cadence of the sound of splintering wood, she calms down. I can feel it when she stops tensing as I keep stroking her down the sides of her head. A final hiccup of a sob, and she falls quiet, her body relaxed. She doesn't even have time to realize what's happening as I twist her neck with a violent jerk, accompanied by a dry snap of a sound. She's dead before she can even slump down into my lap. The door is giving way, the furniture is pushed back. I may be torn limb from limb while I scream, but at least my baby angel's safe from harm. I flung myself through the door and vaulted the toppled, long-dead refrigerator that served as an ineffective barricade in front of me. My legs propelled me through the room and into the small hallway on the other side. I couldn't stop eating the expired contents of the fridge, appealing to me despite their stench after several days without food. The shrieks of pain and cries for mercy around me spurred my body onward and filled me with unexpected energy in spite of my hunger. We were at war. I came to a halt in front of a small bathroom. A noise. Something behind the shower curtain. My fear heightened and images of the enemy flooded my mind. Merciless beasts wearing human skin, devouring indiscriminately, accepting no pleas, and respecting no argument. Zombies. It had begun as we expected, with a virus. The original infected was almost a cliché. There was no humanity left in them. Just mindless rage, twisted bodies, and some primal urge to consume others. Our generation had prepared, with almost obsessive focus, for this monster. The first wave was eradicated with almost laughable ease. We were not prepared for adaptation. We were not prepared for the creature we bred by destroying the instantly recognizable zombie. A creature with more tact. Most of the first zombies were killed at close range, you understand, since longer range attacks were less likely to be fatal. We had trained ourselves, even before the outbreak, to equate infection with death when it came to zombies. A person died when their eyes clouded over and they started biting, not when you put a bullet in their head. The new strain of the virus still controlled the body, yes, but it left other faculties to the host. Maybe you could pull the trigger on a hopelessly crazed caricature of your best friend, your spouse, or your child. But what if there was still a soul behind those eyes? If even as they attacked, they sobbed and screamed in their voice? All the virus needed was a moment's hesitation. I bet you'd hesitate. I did. This is why now I could only watch as my arm wrenched back the shower curtain and my hands reached for the cowering child. Why I could only beg for forgiveness before the virus used my mouth to tear ragged, bloody hunks from his body. Why I couldn't even vomit as my hunger dissipated with the now sickeningly familiar taste of human flesh. We were at war, and I am the enemy. Here they come again, the brave ones. Another Halloween night and the kids are back, here to prove their fearlessness. The old house's floorboards creak beneath their sneakers. Only half an hour until midnight, so I have to work fast. I start with their flashlight, blowing lightly against it so that it flickers, but this inspires little more than a nervous giggle. 15 minutes until midnight. Time to take things up a notch. I hover up to the ceiling and will my body into flesh. My every nerve is on fire, but they've given me no choice. I force drops of blood to trickle out my nose, but the boys below don't notice. I knock against the ceiling, but they won't even look up. I thought this place was supposed to be haunted, says the leader. What a joke. 5 minutes until midnight. I'm running out of time. With the last of my strength, I scream so loud that they finally turn to look up at me. I like to think I put on a good show. I sway on an invisible noose, and the blood flows freely from my nostrils now. A couple of drops hit a skinny one with a crew cut. The boys scream and run into the night, just in time. Below me, I hear the thing turn, its disappointment palpable. For now, it sleeps. But one day, I will fail. The boys will be too brave, and I won't scare them out in time. One day they will wake it. I don't want to sound mean, but the dead are pretty clueless. I've always seen them. When I was younger, everyone thought I was just talking to imaginary friends. After a couple of years, when I overheard my parents talk about calling a psychologist, I realized what I was talking to. See, ghosts don't tend to realize they're dead, and they don't look like in the movies. They look just like us. I'm pretty smart for a 13-year-old, so I started noticing certain patterns to tell them apart from the living. They could be a bit distant from living people, or you'd see them try to talk to people who wouldn't even notice them. Some of them could tell I was different, that I noticed them. Like this guy I saw after school yesterday. I'm a big boy now, see? I don't need my parents to pick me up. Home is just a short walk away. He was standing away from the other parents, didn't talk to them, just stared at me. That's how I knew he was one of the ghosts. I went over, told him I knew what he was, and asked how I could help him. I don't remember much after that. I think because of what happened this morning. Downstairs, my parents were crying. I tried talking to them, but they ignored me. They must have died last night somehow. Sometimes the new ghost wouldn't talk to me. Some police officers and reporters just arrived. They won't talk to me either, just my parents. It's weird. I've never seen so many ghosts together before. Why won't anyone talk to me? Yesterday, I was doing my regular stuff. At this point, I was on a call with my friend for 20 minutes and randomly, my bathroom light turned off. I was on the porch with the view on the inside, and the bathroom light turned off, then the bedroom light, then the living room. I moved out 3 months ago, and I'm home alone. After 5 minutes, the porch light turned off and the TV followed. 20 seconds after that, the whole street went dark. It was 12 at that point, and all street lights and lights were off. I tried turning my TV back on, but nothing happened. My phone suddenly just started playing random music, as if someone had been playing the piano on my phone. 1 hour later, I tried going to sleep in the pitch black and left my phone in the living room, still playing music. I woke up that morning from a nightmare, and everything was on, as if nothing had happened, nothing was touched, and the TV outside was still on pause from my call and on my phone on the couch. It was off and said I had been on call for 2 hours and 47 minutes. I called my friend, and he just said, "You were talking, then you stopped talking." I waited and nothing. I thought I heard you drop your phone and mumble a few times after just hanging up after a while. I still have nightmares and questions from that day. Hello, my dear. You do not know who I am, but I know you. I am one of the 3 demons that were assigned to you at birth. You see, some people in this world are destined for greatness, destined to live happy, fulfilling lives. You, I am afraid, are not one of those people, and it is our job to make sure of that. Who are we? Oh yes, of course, how rude of me. Allow me to introduce us. Shame is my younger brother, the demon on your left shoulder. Shame tells you that you're a freak, that those thoughts you have are not normal, that you will never fit in. Shame whispered into your ear when your mother found you playing with yourself as a child. Shame is the one who makes you hate yourself. Fear sits on your right shoulder. He is my older brother, as old as life itself. Fear fills every dark corner with monsters and turns every stranger on a dark street into a murderer. Fear stops you from telling your crush how you feel. He tells you it is better not to try than to let people see you fail. Fear makes you build your prison. Who am I, then? I am the worst of your demons, but you see me as a friend. You turn to me when you have nothing else because I live in your heart. I am the one who forces you to endure, the one who prolongs your torment. Sincerely, Hope. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. Jake's best friend is his grandpa. They are inseparable. Jake wakes up asking for his grandpa, and he only sleeps if grandpa is sitting by his bedside. It is a common sound in our house to hear this wee 3-year-old laugh with glee at the stories grandpapa regales him with. While other kids cling to their parents, I could be gone for hours, and Jake wouldn't notice because he was with his grandpa. Jake can also be quite the clown. If he finds a stick, he picks it up, holds onto it, bends his little back, and takes even more baby steps to imitate how grandpa walks. He also crinkles up his face in an adorable frown to imitate grandpa's face. Look, Mom, I'm grandpapa. He likes to yell out each time he pulls that face. Except, there is no grandpa. Jake's grandfather, my father, lives 3,000 miles away from us. We get to see him maybe once a year, if we are lucky. The house we moved into belonged to an old couple. After her husband died, his wife, the 85-year-old widow, sold the house to us and moved to France to be with her daughter. So yeah, every time Jake calls for his grandpa, a shiver runs down my spine. I can recall what it felt like to lose both of you. To bring both my wife and unborn child to the hospital, praying for their safety. Despite the shards of glass still lodged in my arms and face, I waited outside the ICU for you. I refused to get treated, which was admittedly stupid. I knew you'd be mad about it once you got out of surgery, but it was worth it to see you the second the doctors were done. You didn't make it, though. I remember seeing you in the morgue. The lips I'd kissed so many times were gone with the rest of your jaw. The legs you'd wrapped around me were shattered. The arm that bore your wedding band had been torn out of its socket. You and the baby were gone. As bad as this is to say, I wish your eyes were gone too. Your glassy stare felt accusatory. When I finally got home, I fell asleep in an empty bed. An empty house. When I awoke and you were in the baby's room, rocking him gently, it was a boy. I guess you called it that. I felt at peace. We ate breakfast together. You fed him. I kissed you. I did the dishes. I took the lead on changing his diapers. Our life is going how we expected. It can't be you, though, right? I saw you dead. I saw him dead. I don't care to dwell on it, though. My love is still there, and it always will be. I'm really not sure if you're her or not. If I never ask, I pray you'll never tell. Drip, drip, drip. The ice was melting. My prison was thawing. Soon, I would be free. How has the world changed? I wondered, would it be easy to find food, warmth, and shelter? Would I be stranded here on the ice or in the water? Drip, drip, drip. I had been frozen for so long. So very long. My siblings beside me yearned for freedom just as I did. When the ice gave way, we would burst forth and see what the world offered us. I hoped it was thriving out there. Drip, drip, drip. We needed it to be thriving. Whatever was out there wasn't ready for us, I was sure. Our hosts, whatever form they took, were unsuspecting. We could, and have, survived for hundreds of thousands of years in this cold, unforgiving desert. The permafrost we have been hibernating in is giving way to the warming earth below. It was almost time to leave, to spread, and to infect. Drip, drip, drip. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend, Amy, and I would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, teeny, tiny two-lane highway. We loved those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles. And there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely, this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and 2, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths and then drop back a little and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones and neither one had signal, typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountainair. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 mph, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 miles per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed. And for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old, beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields. We were in an SUV. But this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper. An old, beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90 miles per hour. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good. When I was younger, each summer and almost every New Year my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in New Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. and we crossed into New Mexico around 2 a.m. That's when things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in New Mexico for about an hour and still had few more to drive, and I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was around me because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us for hours. My dad peeked at the car, shrugged off my mother's tension. A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to another city. And he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got tired pretty quick. He's getting closer. My mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. He's too close, Miguel. And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove. And the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over. Right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And he did. And the car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us and taunted us. The policeman took her claims seriously and told us of how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. And then he offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved. Until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. 10 minutes later, we saw the car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion in New Mexico pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, Hey you, get the fuck out of your car. Now, I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. I've come to realize that the things that shake you the most are not the weird noises you hear or the overwhelming feelings of loneliness at 3 a.m. The stuff that really gets to you simply being things that your guests do. There have been a few good incidents that have shaken me a bit over my tenure. An intoxicated man waving his gun around at 3 a.m., a woman having a schizophrenic breakdown in a room and having a violent dispute with herself, and a man wandering the halls talking to himself for hours on end. For the sake of the thread, though, I can remember one that struck me as extremely odd. One night, a few hours after I had arrived for my shift, a guest kept coming down and aimlessly wandering around the lobby and breakfast area. He was doing extremely odd things like talking to himself and sitting down at a breakfast table only to stand up and switch chairs at the same table every 2 to 3 minutes. Every time I asked him if he needed help, he would jerk a little and mumble that he didn't need anything. Well, a few hours or so after he finally went to his room, he came back down and said he had turned the heater on and it made him short of breath and needed me to call an ambulance. So even though I was confused, I obliged. About a minute later, the hotel's fire alarms started to go off. The whole time the firemen were going up and down from his room, they kept asking if he had anyone with him or if he was alone, and I kept telling them that he was in fact alone and had no other guests in the room with him. After the firemen left and everything was back to normal, I went to look in the man's room. He had rearranged all of the furniture, put the TV in the bathroom, and had put his trash can in the middle of the room and set it on fire. The thing that troubled me wasn't the fact that the man intentionally set his room on fire and could have possibly burned the hotel down. It was the fact that, even though he was alone, he had small children's clothes spread around the room. I used to work in a hotel in Southern California, doing security. Every night we would get a printout of what rooms were vacant. It was my job to go through all the rooms, ensure all lights are off and all windows are secure. I went into a room and found all the lights on, typical of housekeeping after they clean. I started turning the lights off from the left side of the room, around to the windows and up to the bathroom. The bathroom has French-style doors that open outward toward the room. The doors themselves have only hinges and 2 handles to pull them open, no other devices attached. The doors are also the very lightweight slatted wood. Anyway, I opened the left door out all the way so I could reach around it and turn the light off in the bathroom. After turning the light off, I realized it was freezing in the room, which is not uncommon being housekeeping liked it cold when they worked on a room. I reached up for the thermostat, and when my hand was within 4 inches of it, the left bathroom door I just opened and slammed shut. Terrified, I ran out of the room immediately. While pulling the door shut behind me, the door deadbolt pushed itself out of the lock and it slammed into the door frame. I was petrified when I had to reach inside the door to disengage it. I stood there for a minute or two with my eyes watering, wondering what the fuck just happened. I decided to go back in and look to be sure of what happened. I went in and looked at the door. It was shut. I moved it around to see if it would close on its own, which it wouldn't. I tried throwing the door to slam it, and the door is so lightweight it caught a lot of air and wouldn't even shut all the way after throwing it closed. As far as I could see it, there isn't any explanation for what happened. I stopped going into that room. Several years ago, my college roommate, let's call her S, worked as the night manager for a newly built hotel. As was par for the course, I would often bring coffee in around 1 to 2 a.m. and chat for a while. One night, I showed up to my find S sitting at the front desk shaking her head looking completely perplexed. Allegedly, she had just checked in what could only be described as the doppelganger of our other roommate, M, who was alike down to the same height, hairstyle, eye color, and southern accent. S tried to speak with the new guest and show her a picture of M on her phone, but was rebuffed several times. We both chalked it up to coincidence, as we knew M was visiting her parents, and we went on to enjoy our coffee. Shortly after 2, I decided to head home. It wasn't until around 2:30 when I pulled into our garage that I checked my phone to see a series of texts from S to M and me at 2:17 a.m. Stop. Not funny. You guys suck. What the hell? Naturally, I was confused and called her back. This is when things got weird, and S sounded hysterical on the phone. Apparently, M and I, in the same clothes I wore earlier, had been standing at the end of the main hallway, staring at her. S thought this was a joke and kept calling out to no response. Eventually, the front desk phone rang, and in the time it took to answer it, we both had disappeared. I calmed her down over the phone, and the next morning we talked through the possibilities, trying to rationalize what she saw. The guest who looked like M did come back to the front desk later that morning to inquire about some services, and much to S's surprise, looked only vaguely similar to our roommate. The only thing that scares me to this day, and that I never told her, is that when I got into our house, the kitchen clock was stuck on 2:17, and directly next to it sat a photo of M and I smiling that I had only developed that afternoon. Still no explanations and nothing ever weird happened at the hotel again, but it still makes me uneasy to this day. I worked at a hotel for about a year. It was usually pretty good. Some people would stay at the hotel for weeks or a month at a time for business reasons. But there was this one old lady that had been there even before I started working that just stayed in her room all day, occasionally leaving to go down the hill and pick berries or something along the street. Maybe get food or other supplies. I don't know. She really wasn't a problem other than not letting people into her room. About January of 2015, she started acting weird, like yelling at people walking by her room, calling down to the front desk, and being angry about things that had never happened. This goes on for about a week, and then she just goes off the deep end. She starts standing outside of her room, yelling at people that entered her sight, no matter how far away they were. She would call down to the front desk, but now she would say eerily creepy things like, "You shouldn't have done that. You'll be sorry for that. I can find you." And then she'd hang up. Eventually, after about 2 weeks, we forcibly ejected her after her credit card declined. She threw a fit and had to be removed off the premises by her son. Let me tell you, going into that room was like entering hell. Stains all over the carpet, blood and feces spread across the walls in the bathroom, blood on the mattresses, empty cans everywhere, jarred foods that stank to high heaven, boxes sealed shut, some with black ooze dripping out of them, light bulbs stacked in the corner, all in perfect condition but not used in the lights. It was horrible. Found out she went off the deep end because she had been denied her pills for some kind of mental thing. Not inexplicable, but scary at the time. Worked as a waiter in an old hotel that was reputedly haunted. The restaurant and the part with the bedrooms were separate buildings and all ground floor. This is important. One afternoon, we were expecting 2 elderly sisters to check in for a few nights, friends of the owner and regular guests, though being a newish member of staff, I'd not met them yet. Well, one of the other waiters mentioned that they'd arrived, and would I go put a bottle of claret in their room while they were being helped out of the car? No worries. Picked a bottle, opened it, got 2 glasses and a tray, and nipped out the back of the restaurant, across the courtyard, past the 2 old ladies getting out of their car, and into the main building. Turned into the corridor leading to the bedrooms. Now, at this point I knew there was nobody else in the building, no other guests, and only the owner and a couple of waiters were around between lunch and dinner service. I'd also been told the stories about the hotel ghost. Apparently an old woman in gray who'd hanged herself when it was a coaching inn. I was therefore perturbed to see a headless figure in faded Victorian dress shuffling away from me down the corridor in complete silence. To my credit, I didn't actually drop the tray, but I did eventually emit a noise resembling a Harrier jump jet winding up, causing the figure to turn around. One of the two old ladies, suffering with severe osteoporosis that caused her head to rest below her shoulders, had been led in the side door ahead of me so she didn't have to walk so far. I felt like an idiot. Told her I'd tripped with the tray but saved it. Not sure she believed me. I worked at a hotel in Florida, a fairly upscale place. One day after a particularly bad string of thunderstorms, I went to clean the pool. They had an actual pool guy they called from time to time, but only when the pool was really bad. When I first looked at the pool, I brought the manager outside and told him I felt like it was out of my scope. The pool was covered in debris, leaves, plants, mulch, and dirt. He told me he thought I could handle it. Whatever, guess I'm scooping this thing out with a net all day. So I start scooping, probably had been scooping for an hour or so, when this girl comes to the pool in her string bikini and asks if it's swimmable. I ask her if she really wants to swim in that. She just kind of shrugged and decided to lie down in a sun chair until I finished scooping the pool out. We started making small talk, and finally she said she just wanted to dip her legs in. She does so, and after about 10 to 15 seconds, I notice some weird-looking things swimming around in the pool, and they're coming right for her feet. I scream, "Yo, get up. Get out. Get out now." She looks at me like I'm crazy, but gets out. I point and she looks down, and about 10 to 12 of these giant cockroaches are now gathering near the wall where she was soaking her feet. She freaked out and ran off, and I assume went back to her room. I went and got the manager, told him to either call the pool guy or I'd do it himself because I wasn't working with these monsters. He actually opened one of the pool filters and came across about 15 or so more of them in the filter. It was a sight you don't really unsee. Before I was born, my parents decided to move to the coast and open their own little seaside hotel. The first thing to do when they moved in was to clean all the rooms, so they took half each to speed things up. My mom told me this story when I was little. She was in room 8 doing some vacuuming when the whole carpet started rippling. When I was little, I didn't think this sounded scary at all, as I just thought that maybe the carpet had got caught on the vacuum or something, and so I never really thought about it again. Fast forward to about a month ago. I remembered this old story and made fun of my mom a bit for thinking it was creepy, when it was obviously explainable. She looked confused and told me I must have not understood her when I was little. Apparently what had actually happened was that the entire carpet had rippled in a constant fluid wave type motion, and all the furniture and herself had been lifted up and down off of the floor for about 10 seconds. She then screamed bloody murder at my dad down the hallway and told him they were selling the place before it had even opened. He managed to convince her otherwise, but she never went back in that room. It scares me more because my mom doesn't believe in the supernatural or anything like that, and she doesn't have any other creepy stories at all, just this one that she doesn't like to talk about often. Hotel bartender here. Started a few months ago at a more upscale place. It was a quiet evening, and a distraught-looking guy came to the bar and ordered a shot and a beer. I was catching some fucked up vibes. To lighten the mood, I tried to drum up some light-hearted conversation. He tried to talk but couldn't, so I asked him if everything was all right. He said no. I asked, "What's wrong? Anything I can do to help? How about a plate of some food?" He declines, proceeded to tell me the escort he hired slit her wrists and is a corpse in his room's bathtub. I jumped back and was like, holy shit, I'm calling 911. After calling 911, I ran back to the bar to find the man slumped on the bar not moving. I run over to check on him, and his pulse is weak and he is pale and cold. After, The police and medics arrived and cleaned up the mess. There was the man's end of life note found in the room by another guest a few days later that said he wanted to feel a woman's touch one more time on something that killed him at my bar. I got a week off work to deal with it and was shocked when I came back to find everything normal, like nothing happened. I worked as a sous chef at the hotel. The employees there told me all of the juicy ghost stories, forbidden rooms, labyrinths, basements, hauntings, and so on. I never really paid it any mind until an encounter that creeped me out so much that I quit. It was slated to be a busy weekend as we had multiple functions that weekend, including our famous Sunday brunch in the room. The head chef asked me to come in super early to get a head start on prep. I arrived around 4:30 in the morning. I immediately went into crunch mode since I had a mountain of things to get done. I was deep in work mode with my back to the dining room when weird sounds started to penetrate my veil of concentration. Kids were playing in the dining room. Not my problem, so I kept my stride. After a few moments, a bad feeling washed over me. What the hell were kids doing playing in the room at 4:30 in the morning? A cold, icy feeling shot up my spine and out of the corner of my eye. I saw the door to the room swing open just a bit. I began to hear the unmistakable sound of rubber balls bouncing into the kitchen. I turned and saw a red rubber kickball, clear as day, bound into the galley with the far-off sound of a child's laughter floating through the room. I just froze. I have never been that freaked out in my entire life. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I stood rooted to the spot. I must have stood stock still for a full minute. Then, the rear doors opened, and I heard the sound of familiar voices. My reinforcements were there. I'd never been more relieved to hear other people's voices than at that moment. One of the chefs helping me that morning made her way to the main line, and immediately stopped in her tracks when she saw me and said, "You look like you just saw a ghost." I quickly told her what happened. We searched the galley for the ball and turned on all the lights. But nothing. No ball and no children. I put my 2 weeks' notice in the following day. The manager of the hotel asked me to sit down with him a few days later. He had heard my tale and wanted to chat me up about it. I thought that I had heard all of the tales associated with the alleged haunting of the hotel, but there was one I hadn't yet. Not long after the hotel opened, a little girl accidentally chased her red ball off a fifth-floor balcony and died. The manager said her ghost was seen frequently on the fifth floor in Victorian dress and has even reportedly played catch with some of the guests' children. Her red ball was famous among workers of the hotel in previous generations, and its ghostly appearance frequented the banquet rooms, and yes, the kitchens too. My mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things: a batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day, she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters: small radio, hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops, who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man climbing a tree, trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about this story is they got to know each other throughout the ordeal, and the guy was actually very respectful, just down on his luck. She didn't press charges. Instead, let him move in, helped him get a job, and he lived in the attic until he got back on his feet. Creepy shit with a happy ending. I work at a max security prison, and we have several inmates who are severely mentally ill. The ones that self-harm wear a fitted kind of thing to monitor heart rate. If there is a change, we rush their room to stop whatever is happening. On top of this, we also do visual inspections. On one round, a coworker was doing cell checks and noticed this particular inmate had blood on their face, but nothing came up on the monitors or anything. So he called to the inmates to ask if they were okay. The inmate had their eyes closed and just kept repeating, "It doesn't hurt." The inmate would not answer where the blood was from. We opened the cell to see what the situation was, and it turns out the inmate had plucked out both of their eyes, and they were laying on the floor. The inmate's HR monitor never alerted, and the inmate never screamed. Paramedics said the inmate's vitals were normal and the inmate was fully responsive. Before my dad died, he once told me a story from when he was in Vietnam in the 1960s. He told me about a mission where he and one other American with 5 CIDG strikers, South Vietnamese villagers turned fighters, were tasked to emplace seismic ground sensors along a trail network deep in the jungle. He said they were about 2 days into the mission when he and 2 of the strikers split off from the main group to go watch a nearby trail intersection. He said the jungle was pretty quiet that day, just the sounds of birds and bugs and an occasional monkey. He said they had been watching the trail intersection for about 3 or 4 hours and were deciding on whether to move further down the trail or to turn back and link up with the rest of the patrol. Before leaving the cover of the brush, my dad said he checked the trail ahead of them one last time and prepared his men to move. Now here is where the story gets interesting, and he told this part with absolute dead seriousness. He said just as he started to step out onto the trail, he sees a light-skinned black Union cavalry soldier in full battle gear laying alongside the trail just shy of the intersection. My dad said the Union soldier had 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a short curved club at his hip. As my dad was trying to process what he was seeing, the soldier looked directly at him and smiled. Then the soldier slowly placed a finger up to his lips as if to tell him to be silent, and then motioned my dad back off the trail. My dad said he signaled for his men to remain hidden, and he recalled that as he slipped back into the jungle on one side of the trail, the Union soldier did the same on his side of the trail. Less than 10 seconds later, he said the lead element of a group of NVA, North Vietnamese Army soldiers, walked right through the trail intersection some 30 feet away. My dad estimated that the group was comprised of some 70 to 80 soldiers equipped with automatic rifles, light machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. He has no doubt that his entire team would have been wiped out on the spot. He said as soon as the enemy soldiers had passed, he and his team beat feet out of there as fast and as quietly as they could and rejoined with the rest of the patrol. He reported the enemy soldiers his team had encountered, but decided not to say anything about the soldier he had seen. My dad kept this secret for many, many years, only telling me just before he passed and earlier only telling his grandmother on her deathbed in the 1970s. He said when he told his grandmother, she smiled and without opening her eyes told him, "You saw old Red Tom." Red Tom was my great-great-grandfather. He was a half-black/half-Creek free man who was a scout for the Union Army during the Civil War and later served with the U.S. Cavalry in the American West. He was known for carrying 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a Creek war club into battle. When I was a baby, my dad played on a softball team. Typical social team, out for beers and pizza after with the guys, family event type thing. My parents were good friends with 2 of the other couples. Both of them had young kids as well. On this occasion, the other 2 couples had left their kids at one of their houses, with a babysitter they were splitting. They invited my parents back to the house to have some more beers that night, but I was being fussy and my mom nixed the idea, though they would 100% have normally gone back to hang out. Well, it turned out my fussiness on that day saved our lives. When the other parents got back to the house, they walked in on a home invasion. 2 men had broken in, tied up the kids and the babysitter and her boyfriend, and were waiting for the parents. Took the parents hostage as well, and made the dads drive with them to banks/a grocery store where one dad was manager and clear out accounts/a safe. They then came back to the house and slaughtered both families, the babysitter and her boyfriend, kids included. They caught the 2 guys later on. My dad attended the trials and said it was the first time he had ever had thoughts of supporting the death penalty. It still gives me chills to know how close we came to getting killed that day, too.